Hey, how's it going, everybody? So we're going to read this biography of, somebody I'm going to start reading on here. This is a brief memoir of General Clausewitz by translator J.J. Graham. So I'm going to go ahead and just read this biography we have here. Let's see. Karl von Clausewitz was a general, a Prussian general. Let's go ahead and get into this. The author of the work here translated, General Karl von Clausewitz, was born at Berg near Magdeburg in 1780 and entered the Prussian army as Fahnenjunker Ensign in 1792. He served in the campaigns of 1793 through 94 on the Rhine, after which he seems to have devoted some time to the study of the scientific branches of his profession. In 1801, he entered the military school at Berlin and remained there until 1803. During his residence there, he attracted the notice of General Scharnhorst, then at the head of the establishment, and the patronage of this distinguished officer had immense influence on his future career. And we may gather from his writings that he ever afterwards continued to entertain a high esteem for Scharnhorst. In the campaign of 1806, he served as aide-de-camp to Prince Augustus of Prussia, and being wounded and taken prisoner, he was sent into France until the close of that war. On his return, he was placed on General Scharnhorst's staff and employed in the work then going on for the reorganization of the army. He was also at this time selected as military instructor to the late King of Prussia, then Crown Prince. In 1812, Clausewitz, with several other Prussian officers, having entered the Russian service, his first appointment was as aide-de-camp to General Poole. General Poole, I think it's Phul. I know, in German, it would be Clausewitz. So, anyway. Afterwards, while serving with Wittgenstein's army, he assisted in negotiating the famous Convention of Tauroggen with York. Of the part he took in that affair, he has left an interesting account in the work on the Russian campaign. It is there stated that in order to bring the correspondence which had been carried on with York to a termination in one way or another, the author was dispatched to York's headquarters with two letters. One was from General D'Avray, the chief of staff of Wittgenstein's army, to General Diebitsch, showing the arrangements made to cut off York's corps from MacDonald. This was necessary in order to give York a plausible excuse for seceding from the French. The other was an intercepted letter from MacDonald to the Duke of Bassano. With regard to the former of these, the author says it would not have had weight with a man like York, but for a military justification, if the Prussian court should require one as against the French, it was important. The second letter was calculated at the least to call up in General York's mind all the feelings of bitterness which perhaps for some days past had been diminished by the consciousness of his own behavior towards the writer. As the author entered General York's chamber, the latter called out to him, quote, "Keep off from me. I will have nothing more to do with you. Your damn Cossacks have a letter of MacDonald's passed through them, which brings me in order to march on Piktreponen, in order there to effect our junction. All doubt is now at an end. Your troops do not come up. You are too weak. March I must, and I must excuse myself from further negotiation, which may cost me my head." Unquote. The author said that he would make no opposition to all this, but begged for a candle, as he had letters to show the general. And as the latter seemed still to hesitate, the author added, quote, Your Excellency will not surely place me in the embarrassment of departing without having executed my commission, end quote. The general ordered candles and called in Colonel von Raeder, the chief of his staff, from the antechamber. The letters were read. After a pause of an instant, the general said, "Clausewitz, you are a Prussian. Do you believe that the letter of General D'Avray is sincere, and that Wittgenstein's troops will really be at the points he mentioned on the 31st? The author replied, "I pledge myself for the sincerity of this letter upon the knowledge I have of General D'Avray and the other men of Wittgenstein's headquarters, whether the dispositions he announces can be accomplished, as he lays down, I certainly cannot pledge myself, for your excellency knows that in war we must often fall short of the line we have drawn for ourselves. End quote. The general was silent for a few minutes of earnest reflection. Then he held out his hand to the author and said, "You have me. Tell General Diebitsch that we must confer early tomorrow at the mill of Pochenen, and that I am now firmly determined to separate myself from the French and their cause." End quote. The hour was fixed for 8 a.m. After this was settled, the general added, "But I will not do the thing by halves. I will get you Massenbach also." He called in an officer who was of Massenbach's cavalry, and who had just left them, much like Schiller's Wallenstein. He asked, walking up and down the room the while, "What say your regiments?" The officer broke out with enthusiasm at the idea of a riddance from the French alliance, and said that every man of the troops in question felt the same. Quote, "You young ones may talk, but my older head is shaking on my shoulders," end quote, replied the general. After the close of the Russian campaign, Clausewitz remained in the service of that country, but was attached as a Russian staff officer to Blücher's headquarters till the armistice in 1813. In 1814, he became chief of the staff of General Valmoden's Russo-German Corps, which formed part of the Army of the North under the Bernadotte. His name is frequently mentioned with distinction in that campaign, particularly in connection with the affair of Gerde. Clausewitz re-entered the Prussian service in 1815 and served as chief of staff to Thielmann's corps, which was engaged with Grouchy at Wavre, on the 18th of June. After the peace, he was employed in a command on the Rhine. In 1818, he became major general and director of the military school at which he had been previously educated. In 1830, he was appointed inspector of artillery at Breslau, but soon after nominated chief of staff to the Army of Observation under Marshal Gneisenau on the Polish frontier. The latest notices of his life and services are probably to be found in the memoirs of General Brandt, who, from being on the staff of Gneisenau's army, was brought into daily intercourse with Clausewitz in matters of duty, and also frequently met him at the table of Marshal Gneisenau at Posen. Amongst other anecdotes, General Brandt relates that, upon one occasion, the conversation at the marshal's table turned upon a sermon preached by a priest, in which some great absurdities were introduced, and a discussion arose as to whether the bishop should not be made responsible for what the priest had said. This led to the topic of theology in general, when General Brandt, speaking of himself, says, quote, "I expressed an opinion that theology is only to be regarded as a historical process, as a moment in the gradual development of the human race. This brought upon me an attack from all quarters, but more especially from Clausewitz, who ought to have been on my side. He, having been an adherent and pupil of Clausewitz, who had indoctrinated him in the philosophy of Kant, certainly diluted, I might even say in homeopathic doses," end quote. This anecdote is only interesting as the mention of Clausewitz points to a circumstance in the life of Clausewitz that may have had an influence in forming those habits of thought which distinguish his writings. "The way," says General Brandt, "in which General Clausewitz judged of things, drew conclusions from movements and marches, calculated the times of the marches, and the points where decisions would take place, was extremely interesting. Fate has unfortunately denied him an opportunity of showing his talents in high command, but I have a firm persuasion that as a strategist, he would have greatly distinguished himself. As a leader on the field of battle, on the other hand, he would not have been much in his right place, from a manque d'habitude du commandement. He wanted the art d'enlever les troupes. After the Prussian army of observation was dissolved, Clausewitz returned to Breslau, and a few days after his arrival was seized with cholera, the seeds of which he must have brought with him from the army of the Polish frontier. His death took place in November 1831. His writings are contained in 9 volumes, published after his death, but his fame rests most upon the 3 volumes, forming his treatise on war. In the present attempt to render into English this portion of the works of Clausewitz, the translator is sensible of many deficiencies, but he hopes at all events to succeed in making the celebrated treatise better known in England, believing as he does that so far as the work concerns the interests of this country, it has lost none of the importance it possessed at the time of its first publication. Okay, yeah. So this is the brief memoir of General Clausewitz. It's by the translator J.J. Cram. So yeah, we got a little heads up on who General Clausewitz was. I was having trouble with some of these European names. You know, I thought I'd be used to getting pronunciations out as much as the Bolsheviks I read. But you know, this is sometimes I have to jump back from how vowels and consonants are pronunciated. You know, if it's a Spanish name or a French name or a German name. But yeah, well, thank y'all for tuning in. You know, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, Medium. All of these are Marxists. Hit me up there. Y'all have a great day. Dalagoy.